It's not your fault. Daddy is just hurting.
What would you do if you came home early one day and discovered your most sacred household rule had been shattered? A millionaire walked into his own living room and froze at the doorway. His heart stopped. His blood ran cold. The one thing he had explicitly forbidden, the one thing he swore would never happen under his roof, was unfolding right before his eyes. And the person responsible, the woman he trusted most with his children, she was on her knees. His twin boys were beside her. And what they were doing together, it was the very thing he had banned from his home 3 years ago. In that frozen moment, this wealthy man faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. Have you ever walked into a moment that completely shattered everything you believed? A moment so unexpected, so jarring, that it forced you to question your entire worldview? Have you ever been so broken by loss that you pushed away the very thing that could heal you, built walls so high that you couldn't see the light trying to break through? And here's the harder question. What would you do if someone you employed, someone you trusted, crossed a line you swore would never be crossed? Would you react with fury? With hurt? Would you fire them immediately? Or would you pause long enough to ask yourself, why did they do it? Today's story is about a wealthy widower, drowning in grief he refuses to acknowledge. It's about a black housemaid who risked everything because she loved 2 little boys more than she feared losing her job. It's about 7-year-old twins who simply wanted to talk to their mommy in heaven. This is a collision of race, class, and heartbreak. A battle between employer and employee, standing on opposite sides of an impossible divide. A forbidden act that becomes the spark igniting an unexpected transformation. But here's what sets this story apart from anything you've heard before. What began as the ultimate betrayal became the greatest blessing this family ever received. By the end of this video, you will witness a frozen heart begin to thaw. You will watch years of carefully constructed walls crumble. You will experience love blooming in the most unlikely circumstances, and you will understand why the rules we create to protect ourselves are sometimes the very things destroying us. Stay until the final moment, because when this millionaire finally understood why his maid broke his rule, that revelation will stay with you long after this story ends. Welcome back to Mr. Roman's Story Vault. If you're new here, you've just discovered your new home for powerful stories that touch the heart and teach life-changing lessons. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a heart in the comments if you believe in second chances, and if faith has ever carried you through darkness, share that below. Now, let's journey to South Carolina. In the heart of South Carolina's lowcountry, where the air hangs thick with humidity and history, there stood an estate that whispered of old money and older secrets. The Sinclair mansion rose from the earth like a monument to success, a sprawling antebellum style home with towering white columns that had witnessed generations of Southern aristocracy. The property stretched across 12 acres of manicured grounds bordered by ancient live oak, trees whose gnarled branches reached toward the heavens like the arms of elderly worshippers. Spanish moss dripped from those branches in silvery curtains, swaying gently in the warm breeze, casting dancing shadows across the crushed shell driveway below. This was land that remembered, land that had once been a working plantation, now transformed into the private kingdom of a man who had clawed his way from nothing to everything. Bennett Sinclair stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with salt and pepper hair that had grayed prematurely at the temples and steel-grey eyes that revealed nothing of the storm within. At 43 years old, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had conquered every obstacle life had thrown at him. Every obstacle except one. He was a self-made millionaire. The son of a factory worker and a school teacher, Bennett had grown up in a modest home on the wrong side of Charleston. He'd worked construction during summers, earned a scholarship to Duke University, and graduated with honors in finance. By 30, he had founded Sinclair Capital Partners. By 35, he had made his first 10 million. By 40, he owned this estate, a fleet of luxury vehicles, and a reputation. as one of the sharpest investment minds in the Southeast. From the outside, Bennett Sinclair had achieved the American dream in its purest form. But wealth, as anyone who truly possesses it will tell you, cannot purchase peace. It cannot buy back time, and it most certainly cannot resurrect the dead. The mansion itself was a masterpiece of Southern architecture, a wraparound porch with rocking chairs that no one ever used, crystal chandeliers imported from France that illuminated rooms where laughter had become a stranger, a gourmet kitchen with marble countertops where elaborate meals were prepared but rarely enjoyed, 5 bedrooms, each decorated with museum-quality precision, most of them empty and echoing. Bennett's study occupied the east wing, a sanctuary of mahogany bookshelves, leather, bound volumes, and a massive desk where he spent most of his waking hours. The walls displayed his accomplishments, framed magazine covers, awards, from business associations, photographs with governors and senators. Yet the most important photograph sat not on the wall but on his desk, turned slightly away from his direct line of sight. It was a wedding photo. A younger Bennett, his smile genuine and unguarded, standing beside a woman whose beauty seemed to radiate from within. Her auburn hair caught the sunlight. Her green eyes sparkled with joy. Her hand rested on his chest, directly over his heart. Caroline, his wife, his anchor, his reason for everything. 3 years gone now, and the wound still bled fresh every single day. The household staff had learned to navigate Bennett's moods. The groundskeeper, Jerome, tended the gardens in silence. The cook, Mrs. Patterson, prepared his meals without small talk. The driver, Carson, kept the vehicles immaculate and his opinions to himself. Everyone understood the unspoken rule. Mr. Sinclair valued efficiency, privacy, and emotional distance. He paid well, he demanded excellence, and he tolerated no intrusions into his carefully constructed world of isolation. The only exceptions to his rigid emotional walls were 2 7-year-old boys who shared his grey eyes and his late wife's gentle spirit. His sons, Elijah and Jonah. The twins were the sole reason Bennett rose each morning, the only force capable of pulling him from the quicksand of his grief. For them, he maintained the appearance of a functioning father. For them, he kept the mansion running, the meals served, the routines intact. But even his love for his children couldn't thaw the ice that had formed around his heart. In the quiet moments, late at night when the house fell silent or early, in the morning before anyone else stirred, Bennett Sinclair sat alone, in his study, staring at that wedding photograph, and wondered how a man could possess so much, yet feel so utterly, devastatingly empty. To understand the man Bennett had become, you must first understand the woman who had made him whole. Caroline Elizabeth Sinclair, née Montgomery, was the kind of woman who entered a room and made everyone in it feel seen. She had grown up in a devoutly Christian household in Savannah, Georgia, the daughter of a Baptist minister and a choir director. Faith wasn't just something Caroline practiced on Sundays, it was woven into the fabric of her daily existence. She said grace before every meal, even breakfast. She prayed with the boys each night before bed, teaching them to thank God for their blessings and ask for guidance. She hummed hymns while gardening and kept a worn Bible on her nightstand, its pages soft from years of handling. When Bennett first met her at a charity gala in downtown Charleston, he was a driven young businessman with little use for religion. Caroline had changed that, not through lectures or pressure, but through the quiet example of her joy. Her faith gave her a peace that Bennett found intoxicating. She laughed easily. She forgave quickly. She loved without condition. "I don't understand how you're always so calm," he had told her once, early in their marriage. She had smiled that radiant smile. "Because I know I'm not walking alone, Bennett. None of us are." He hadn't fully believed her, but he had loved her enough to respect her beliefs. He attended church with her on Sundays. He bowed his head when she prayed. He watched as she knelt beside their twin sons' beds each night, teaching them words of gratitude and hope. Caroline made their house a home. She made Bennett's success feel meaningful. She gave him something money could never buy, a reason to come home at the end of each day. The accident happened on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 years ago. Caroline had been driving home from a women's Bible study group at their church. The roads were wet from an afternoon rain shower. A delivery truck ran a red light at the intersection of Highway 17 and Magnolia Drive. The impact was catastrophic. By the time Bennett reached the hospital, she was already in surgery. He paced the sterile hallways for 6 hours, making phone calls he couldn't remember, answering questions he couldn't process. At some point he found himself in the hospital chapel, a small dimly lit room with wooden pews and a simple cross on the wall. Bennett Sinclair, who had never prayed alone in his life, fell to his knees. "Please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "Please, God. I'll do anything. Take everything I have. Take my money, my company, my house. Just let her live. Please. I can't do this without her." He prayed until his voice gave out. He prayed until his knees ached. He prayed with every ounce of faith he could summon, borrowing from the well of belief Caroline had tried so hard to fill within him. The surgeon found him there an hour later. "Mr. Sinclair, I'm so sorry." Those 3 words demolished everything. Caroline was gone. The woman who had taught him that God was good, that prayer was powerful, that faith could move mountains. She had been taken while Bennett knelt in a chapel begging for her life. In the weeks that followed, something inside Bennett calcified into stone. His grief transformed into rage, not at the truck driver, who had died in the crash as well, but at God, at faith itself, at every prayer Caroline had ever uttered, every Sunday morning she had spent in church, every bedtime blessing she had whispered over their sons. What was the point? What good had any of it done? 1 month after the funeral, Bennett gathered his household staff and delivered a single, non-negotiable directive. "There will be no discussion of God, religion, or prayer in this house. Not with me, not with each other, and especially not with my children. That subject is closed. Permanently." When the woman who had taught him to hope died, Bennett decided that hope was the cruelest lie of all. He would protect his sons from that lie, no matter the cost. Elijah and Jonah Sinclair came into the world 7 minutes apart on a crisp October morning, their cries harmonizing in the delivery room like a duet they had been rehearsing in the womb. From their first breath, they were inseparable. Now 7 years old, the twins shared their mother's auburn hair and their father's grey eyes. A combination that made strangers do double takes on the rare occasions they ventured out in public. But beyond their physical resemblance, each boy had developed his own distinct personality, shaped by the tragedy they were too young to fully understand. Elijah, Eli, as everyone called him, was the quieter of the two. He processed the world through careful observation, his watchful eyes taking in details that others missed. Eli was the boy who noticed when the housekeeper seemed sad, who asked why the birds outside his window sang different songs in the morning than at night. He carried a small spiral notebook everywhere, filling its pages with drawings of things he wanted to remember. The garden his mother had planted, the shape of clouds on a summer afternoon, the way his father looked when he didn't know anyone was watching. Eli remembered his mother in fragments, the smell of her perfume, the way she tucked the blankets under his chin, the sound of her voice when she sang lullabies. These memories were fading with each passing year, and Eli clung to them desperately, terrified of the day they might disappear entirely. Jonah, born 7 minutes later, was his brother's opposite in temperament. Where Eli was cautious, Jonah was bold. Where Eli observed, Jonah acted. He was the boy who climbed trees too high, asked questions too loudly, and refused to accept because I said so as a valid explanation for anything. Jonah's memories of his mother were fewer than his brother's, but his longing for her was no less acute. He expressed his grief through restless energy and occasional outbursts of frustration that even he didn't fully understand. When he missed her most, he didn't grow quiet like Eli. He grew defiant, testing boundaries as if challenging the universe to take something else from him. Together, the twins navigated the strange landscape of their grief-stricken home. They attended an elite private school in Charleston, where they earned good grades and made few friends. The other children didn't know what to say to boys who had lost their mother, and Eli and Jonah didn't know how to explain the weight they carried. So they leaned on each other, speaking in the private language that only twins understand, sharing looks that communicated volumes without a single word. At home, the mansion felt more like a museum than a living space. Their father was physically present but emotionally unreachable, always. Working in his study, always distracted by phone calls and documents. He hugged them mechanically. He asked about their homework, without really listening to the answers. He sat at the dinner table with them each evening, his mind clearly elsewhere. The boys had learned not to mention their mother. They had tried, once, shortly after her death. Jonah had asked when Mommy was coming back from heaven. Their father's face had crumbled, rebuilt itself into stone, and he had left the room without answering. After that, the boys understood Mommy was a forbidden subject. But children's hearts don't obey adult rules. In recent weeks, Eli had begun asking questions again, whispered questions to their caretaker when their father wasn't home. Do you think Mommy can see us? What happens when people go to heaven? Can you talk to God even if you're just a kid? Jonah, bolder as always, had asked directly at the dinner table, Dad, did Mommy used to pray with us? I think I remember something like that. Their father's fork had frozen halfway to his mouth. His jaw had tightened. Eat your dinner, Jonah, he had said, his voice clipped. We don't discuss that. The twins had exchanged a look of shared confusion and shared sorrow. They didn't understand why talking about God made their father so angry. They didn't understand why they weren't allowed to remember the things their mother had taught them. They only knew that something important was missing from their lives, something, beyond the obvious absence of the woman who had brought them into the world. They longed for comfort, for connection, for someone who would answer their questions without flinching. They just didn't know that someone was already there, watching over them, waiting for the right moment to help. Sheila Thompson arrived at the Sinclair estate on a grey January morning, carrying a single suitcase and a heart full of faith. She was 30 years old, with warm brown skin, high cheekbones, and dark hair she typically wore in a neat bun while working. Her eyes held a depth that came from having known both sorrow and salvation. And her smile, when she offered it, could light up even the coldest room. Sheila had grown up in Hartsville, a small town in rural South Carolina where everybody knew everybody, and the church was the center of community life. Her grandmother, Nettie Mae Thompson, had raised her from the age of 5. After Sheila's mother succumbed to complications from diabetes, Nettie Mae was a woman of profound faith, the kind who spoke to Jesus like an old friend, and believed that every hardship was just God preparing you for a greater purpose. The Lord doesn't give burdens to the weak, child, Nettie Mae used to say. He gives them to the strong, because he knows they can carry them. Sheila had internalized that lesson. She had carried many burdens. She had worked her way through 2 years of college, studying early childhood education at a community college an hour from home. She had dreamed of becoming a kindergarten teacher, of filling classrooms with laughter and learning. Those dreams were set aside when Nettie Mae was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. Without hesitation, Sheila had left school to care for her grandmother. For 3 years, she had been nurse, companion, and advocate, managing medications, attending doctor's appointments, holding Nettie Mae's hand through the difficult nights. When her grandmother finally passed, peacefully and surrounded by love, Sheila was left with no degree, limited savings, and a heart heavy with grief. But Sheila Thompson was not a woman who surrendered to circumstance. She took whatever work she could find, cleaning houses, caring for elderly neighbors, babysitting for families in the community. When she saw the advertisement for a live-in housekeeping and childcare position at the Sinclair estate, something stirred in her spirit. The pay was excellent. The room and board would solve her housing concerns. And the job involved caring for children, something that had always brought her joy. She applied. She interviewed. She was hired. Several months later, Sheila had become far more than an employee. Officially, her duties included housekeeping, meal preparation, and caring for the twins while their father worked. She woke the boys each morning, prepared their breakfast, drove them to school, and welcomed them home each afternoon. She helped with homework, prepared dinner, and ensured they were bathed and in bed at a reasonable hour. She kept the mansion spotless, the laundry folded, the pantry stocked. Unofficially, Sailor had become the emotional anchor of the Sinclair household. She was the one who noticed when Eli was having a bad day and needed extra encouragement. She was the one who redirected Jonah's defiant energy into productive activities. She was the one who listened, truly listened, when the boys spoke about their feelings, their fears, their fading memories of the mother they missed so desperately. Mr. Sinclair treated her with polite formality. He addressed her as Miss Thompson and thanked her for her work in clipped, efficient sentences. He never asked about her background, her family, her dreams. To him, she was a service provider, competent, reliable, and ultimately invisible. Sailor understood her position. She respected the boundaries. She never overstepped. But in the quiet moments, when she tucked the boys into bed, when she watched Mr. Sinclair retreat to his study with slumped shoulders, when she observed the vast emptiness of this beautiful home, she prayed. She prayed silently, secretly, in the privacy of her small bedroom on the 3rd floor. She prayed for Eli and Jonah to find healing. She prayed for Mr. Sinclair to find his way out of the darkness. She prayed for this family that had welcomed her into their home without ever truly seeing her. And she prayed for wisdom, because she sensed that a moment was approaching. A moment when she would have to choose between keeping her job and doing what was right. Little did Bennett Sinclair know that this quiet, faithful woman would become the bridge between his broken past and his healing future. Little did he know that everything was about to change. The autumn heat in South Carolina hung thick and oppressive on that Wednesday afternoon, the kind of humidity that made the air feel like warm syrup in your lungs. Bennett Sinclair's black Mercedes glided along Interstate 26, heading southeast toward Charleston. He had left Atlanta earlier that morning, cutting short what was supposed to be a week-long business conference. The investment summit still had 2 days remaining, but Bennett found himself unable to concentrate on market projections and portfolio strategies. His mind kept drifting to his sons. It was unusual for him, this sudden, overwhelming desire to see Eli and Jonah. Bennett prided himself on compartmentalization, on his ability to focus entirely on the task at hand without emotional distractions. Yet throughout the morning's presentations, he had checked his phone repeatedly, looking at the photo on his home screen, the twins on their 7th birthday, grinning at the camera with chocolate cake smeared on their faces. Something pulled him homeward, an invisible thread tugging at his chest. He made his excuses to colleagues, packed his overnight bag, and hit the road before lunch. He hadn't called ahead, hadn't texted Miss Thompson to inform her of his early return. The idea of surprising his boys appealed to him. He could already see their faces lighting up when he walked through the door. The drive from Atlanta to Charleston took just over 4 hours. Bennett spent most of it in silence, declining phone calls from his office, letting the miles pass beneath his wheels. As he crossed into South Carolina, the landscape transformed into the familiar, low-country terrain he had come to love. Flat expanses of marsh grass, winding waterways reflecting the afternoon sun, and finally, the canopy of live oaks that marked the approach to his property. The turn-off to his estate came at 3:47 p.m. Bennett steered onto the private drive, passing beneath the wrought-iron arch bearing the family name. The crushed shell driveway crunched softly beneath his tires as the Mercedes rolled forward, flanked on, both sides by those ancient oak trees with their curtains of Spanish moss swaying in the sluggish breeze. He felt something shift in his chest, a lightness he couldn't quite name. When had he last come home eager to be there, rather than simply retreating to his study to work? The mansion came into view, its white columns gleaming in the afternoon sun. Bennett parked in the circular drive, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the sudden quiet. Through the windows, he could see no movement. The house appeared still, peaceful. He grabbed his briefcase and suit jacket from the passenger seat, leaving his luggage in the trunk to retrieve later. His expensive Italian leather shoes made no sound on the brick walkway leading to the front entrance. The heavy oak door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges, one of the many things Miss Thompson maintained impeccably. Bennett stepped into the foyer. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked its steady rhythm. The air conditioning hummed quietly. Sunlight slanted through the tall windows, creating geometric patterns on the polished hardwood floors. But something caught his attention immediately. Voices. Soft, coming from somewhere toward the back of the house. The living room, if he had to guess. Bennett set his briefcase down carefully on the entry table, his brow furrowed. The boys should still be at after-school program for another hour. He had checked the schedule before leaving Atlanta. Yet those were definitely children's voices he heard. Curiosity pulled him forward. He moved through the hallway with unconscious stealth, years of walking. These floors teaching his feet where to step to avoid creaks. As he approached the living room, the voices grew clearer. Not playful shouting or arguing. Something quieter, more measured. Recitation. Bennett slowed, his pulse quickening for reasons he couldn't identify. The living room archway stood 20 feet ahead. The voices continued, Miss Thompson's gentle alto, and beneath it, the twins speaking in unison. His sons were home early. That explained the voices. Probably sick, or perhaps camp had been cancelled. Miss Thompson was likely helping them with some educational activity, reading, perhaps, or memorization exercises. Bennett's hand touched the door frame as he prepared to announce his presence. Then he heard the words clearly for the first time. Thank you, God, for our daddy and mommy in heaven. His hand froze. His entire body went rigid. For 3 heartbeats, Bennett Sinclair stood paralyzed in his own hallway, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. Then, moving as though in a dream, he leaned forward slightly and looked into the living room. What he saw stopped his heart cold. The late afternoon sun streamed through the sheer curtains of the living room, creating a golden glow that seemed to surround the 3 figures on the floor like a halo. Miss Sheila Thompson knelt on the antique Persian rug, her posture straight but gentle. On either side of her, mirroring her position, were Eli and Jonah. All 3 had their heads bowed. All 3 had their hands folded. All 3 had their eyes closed. They were praying. In his house, in direct violation of the one absolute rule he had established 3 years ago. Bennett's breath caught in his throat. He knew he should stop this immediately, should stride into that room and end this forbidden activity. Yet he remained frozen in the archway, watching and listening with a horrible fascination. Sheila's voice was warm and steady, carrying the cadence of someone who had spoken these words countless times before. Thank you, God, for our daddy and mommy in heaven, she said softly. The twins repeated after her, their young voices blending together. Thank you, God, for our daddy and mommy in heaven. Bennett's hands clenched into fists. The mention of Caroline Mummy in heaven struck him like a physical blow to the chest. The casual way Sheila introduced his late wife into this prayer, the ease with which his sons spoke the words, as if they had been practicing. How long had this been going on? Sheila continued, her eyes still closed, her arms gently encompassing both boys. And for this beautiful day, she said. And for this beautiful day, Elle and Jonah echoed. Please bless our family and watch over us, Sheila concluded. Please bless our family and watch over us. The twins repeated. Amen. Amen. The word hung in the air like the final note of a hymn. All 3 opened their eyes. Bennett saw Jonah glance up at Sheila with an expression of such trust, such comfort, that it made his heart twist painfully. Eli's face held a peaceful quality Bennett hadn't seen there in months, maybe years. Then Eli spoke, his voice small and earnest. Miss Sheila, is Mommy really watching over us from heaven? The question sliced through Bennett like a blade. His 7-year-old son, asking about his dead mother, seeking reassurance about the afterlife that Bennett no longer believed in. The son he had been trying to protect from exactly this kind of false hope. Sheila reached out and brushed a lock of auburn hair from Eli's forehead, with such tenderness that Bennett felt something crack inside his chest. When she spoke, her voice carried absolute conviction. I believe she is, sweetheart, Sheila said gently. And I believe God is listening whenever you want to talk about your feelings. That's what prayer is, just talking and sharing from your heart. Your mommy loved you so much, and I think wherever she is now, she still does. That kind of love doesn't just disappear. Jonah leaned into Sheila's side. Do you think she heard us just now? I do, Sailor replied, wrapping her arm around him. I think she's so proud of what good, kind boys you're growing up to be. Eli's eyes glistened with tears, but he was smiling. I'm glad we can talk to her this way. It makes me feel less sad. Me too, Jonah agreed. Can we pray again tomorrow? Sailor started to respond, then hesitated. For the first time, a shadow of concern crossed her face. We'll see, honey. Remember, this is something we need to... What on earth is going on here? Bennett's voice cut through the moment like a thunderclap. All three figures on the rug startled violently. Jonah actually tumbled backward, his coordination failing him in surprise. Eli's head whipped toward the doorway, his eyes going wide with shock. Sela's hand flew to her chest, her sharp intake of breath audible across the room. Daddy! Jonah scrambled to his feet, his expression a confused mixture of delight and fear. You're home. Eli rose more slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for Sailor's arm. His face, which had been so peaceful moments before, now registered the tension radiating from his father like heat from a furnace. Bennett stepped fully into the room. He was still wearing his business attire, charcoal suit pants, a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, his tie loosened. His jaw was set in a hard line. His grey eyes, usually so carefully controlled, blazed with an emotion that made even Jonah take a step backward. Sailor rose to her feet slowly, gracefully, positioning herself slightly in front of the boys. When she spoke, her voice was steady despite the obvious pounding of her heart. Mr. Sinclair, we didn't hear you come in. I can see that, Bennett said coldly. Each word was clipped, precise, controlled. I can see exactly what you were doing. Daddy, Jonah began. Bennett held up one hand, silencing his son without even looking at him. His eyes remained fixed on Sailor. Miss Thompson, a word. Now, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Eli's grip on Sailor's arm tightened. Dad, don't be mad, he said, his voice trembling. Miss Sailor was just helping us. Helping you? Bennett's voice remained quiet, which somehow made it more menacing than if he had shouted. Helping you do what exactly? Jonah, bolder than his brother, stepped forward. She was showing us how to talk to Mommy and to God. We asked her to, Daddy. We wanted to know. The mention of Caroline, casual, innocent, but a direct violation of the unspoken rule, made Bennett's hands clench at his sides. He felt the familiar surge of anger and grief warring inside him, the toxic mixture that had become his constant companion over the past 3 years. Prayer makes us feel better, Dad, Eli added quietly. We miss Mom. For just a moment, a single heartbeat, Bennett's expression softened. His eyes met Eli's, and he saw his son's pain reflected there, the ache of a child who barely remembered his mother but mourned her nonetheless. The anger wavered, then it hardened again, reinforced by fear and the desperate need to maintain control. Eli Jonah. Bennett's voice was firm now, the tone he used when there would be no negotiation. Go upstairs to your room. Now, but Daddy, Jonah protested. Now, the boys exchanged panicked glances. They had heard their father use that tone perhaps 6 times in their lives. Always when something was seriously wrong. They knew better than to argue further, but Jonah, true to his nature, couldn't leave without asking the question that terrified him. Are you going to fire Miss Sailor? The bluntness of it, the clear understanding that their father's anger meant someone they loved might be taken from them, struck Bennett like a slap. His sons were 7 years old. They shouldn't have to fear losing the people they cared about, yet here they were, again. Bennett forced his expression into something resembling calm. I need to speak with Miss Thompson privately. Go to your room. I'll come talk to you both in a few minutes. It was the best reassurance he could offer, though it promised nothing. Eli looked up at Sailor, his eyes brimming with tears. Sailor bent down and squeezed his hand. It's okay, sweetheart, she whispered. Go on now. Your daddy and I just need to talk. The twins left slowly, reluctantly, looking back over their shoulders twice before disappearing into the hallway. Bennett heard their footsteps on the stairs. heard the distant sound of their bedroom door closing. Then silence fell over the living room. Bennett and Selah stood 15 feet apart, the afternoon sunlight still streaming through the windows, the impression of 3 bodies still visible on the soft fibers of the Persian rug. Selah straightened her spine, clasped her hands in front of her apron, and met Bennett's gaze directly. She did not cower. She did not look away. Despite the fear he could see in the slight trembling of her hands, she held her ground with quiet dignity. "Mr. Sinclair," she began, "I need an explanation." Bennett's voice was tight, controlled, but underneath it churned an ocean of hurt. "You know the rules of this household. You have always known them. I made myself extremely clear when I hired you. No discussion of God. No talk of religion. No prayer. Not with the staff. Not with my children. Not ever." Selah nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, I do know, and I take full responsibility for what you just witnessed." The straightforward admission caught Bennett off guard. He had expected excuses, deflection, perhaps even denial. Instead, she simply acknowledged her actions without attempting to minimize them. "Then why?" The word came out harsher than he intended, edged with genuine confusion. "Why would you deliberately go against my explicit instructions? You've been a model employee for an entire year. Never a single issue, never a complaint. What possessed you to do this?" Selah took a careful breath. "Sir, with all due respect, the boys have been asking me questions for weeks now. Questions about their mother, questions about heaven, questions about God, and you should have deflected those questions," Bennett said sharply. "Or, better yet, informed me so that I could address them myself." "I tried, Mr. Sinclair," Selah replied, her voice gentle but firm. "The first several times I did exactly that. I told them those were questions for their father, but they kept asking. And the questions weren't just curious, they were hurting." Bennett shook his head, unwilling to hear her justification. "I don't pay you to be their therapist or their spiritual counselor. I pay you to take care of the household and supervise my children's basic needs." "Basic needs." Selah repeated the word softly, and something in her tone made Bennett's eyes narrow. "Mr. Sinclair, those boys need more than clean clothes and balanced meals. They're grieving children who lost their mother when they were barely old enough to remember her. Don't." The word came out sharp as a whip crack. "Don't presume to tell me what my sons need." But Selah, having already crossed the line, seemed to find courage in her conviction. Today, Jonah came home from camp in tears. Another child told him his mother probably forgot about him because dead people can't remember the living. He was devastated, sir, heartbroken. He asked me if it was true, if his mummy had forgotten him. Bennett felt the words hit him squarely in the chest. Jonah, his bold, fearless Jonah, crying over the thought that Caroline might have forgotten him. The image made his throat tighten. "What was I supposed to do?" Selah continued, her own eyes glistening now. "Tell him I couldn't talk about it? Send him to you when you were in Atlanta? Let him sit with that pain, believing his mother's love just evaporated?" "You could have comforted him without resorting to prayer," Bennett said, but even he could hear the weakness in the argument. "Could I have?" Selah challenged gently. What comfort could I offer that didn't acknowledge his mother's spirit, her love, continuing beyond death, the possibility that she's still with him in some way? What secular words ease that kind of pain in a 7-year-old? Bennett's jaw worked. He had no answer, and they both knew it. Selah took a small step forward. "I understand you've been hurt. I can't begin to comprehend the depth of losing your wife. But sir, those boys carry that loss too, and they need something, someone, to help them process it. You've forbidden them from talking about her. You've shut down every question about faith or heaven or because it's a lie." The words erupted from Bennett with volcanic force, 3 years of suppressed anguish suddenly breaking free. "Because I prayed, Miss Thompson. I begged God on my knees in that hospital chapel to save her. I promised him everything, my money, my company, my own life. And she died anyway." The rawness in his voice echoed through the room. Selah's expression softened with profound compassion. "I know," she said quietly, "and I'm deeply sorry." Bennett ran a hand through his hair, suddenly exhausted. You don't know. You can't know what it's like to have your prayers mean nothing. You're right, Sailor said softly. I don't know your specific pain, but I know mine. I prayed for my grandmother's healing too. I know what unanswered prayers feel like. Bennett looked at her then, really looked at her for the first time. He saw past the uniform, past the employee designation, and recognized the grief in her eyes, a grief that mirrored his own. But recognition wasn't enough to undo the betrayal he felt. This is a breach of trust, Miss Thompson, he said finally, his voice returning to its controlled flatness. I left my children in your care, and you directly violated my instructions. I can't have someone in this house who disregards my authority. He saw her shoulders stiffen, saw her preparing for the blow she knew was coming. Bennett took a breath. I'm going to have to let you go. The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water. Sela's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back rapidly. Her chin lifted slightly. I understand, Mr. Sinclair. The quiet dignity in her acceptance somehow made everything worse. Bennett had expected tears, pleading, perhaps anger. Instead, she simply accepted his decision with the same grace she seemed to bring to everything. I'll arrange for Carson to drive you wherever you need to go, Bennett continued, defaulting to the practicalities because they were safer than emotions. And I'll pay you an additional month's salary in lieu of notice. That should give you time to find another position. Money, always money, as if compensation could repair what was broken. Sela nodded. That's very generous. Thank you. She turned toward the hallway, moving to leave. Miss Thompson, Bennett called after her. She stopped, turned back. He wanted to say something, what he didn't know. An apology, a retraction. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply said, You have until this evening. Yes, sir. And Sela Thompson walked out of the living room, her back straight and her dignity intact, leaving Bennett Sinclair, alone with the ghost of Caroline's memory and the echo of his son's prayers still hanging in the air. Before we continue, I want to pause right here. If you're feeling the weight of this moment, the tension, the heartbreak, the impossible choice, you're not alone. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you do if you were Bennett? What would you do if you were Sela? This is where faith and pain collide, where rules meet compassion, where one decision changes everything. If this story is moving you, do me a favor, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's struggling with grief. Someone who's built walls so high they can't see the help standing right in front of them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now, because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about forgiveness, healing, and second chances. Now, let's see what happens when the truth comes to light. Sela climbed the stairs to the third floor with measured steps, fighting to keep her composure until she reached the privacy of her room. The small bedroom she occupied had been her sanctuary for the past year, a modest space with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that overlooked the back gardens. It wasn't much, but it had been hers. Safe, stable, a place where she could rest after long days caring for two boys who had wrapped themselves around her heart so completely that leaving them felt like tearing off her own skin. She pulled her suitcase from the closet and laid it open on the bed. Her hands trembled as she began removing clothes from the dresser, drawers, folding them with the same care she always took, even now. Grandmother Nettie May had taught her that dignity wasn't something others gave. It was something you carried with you, especially in the hardest moments. The Lord doesn't waste our pain, baby girl, Nettie May used to say. Every hurt is a seed for something beautiful if we let it be. Sela wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. But right now, all she felt was the crushing weight of loss, not just of a job, but of two children she had come to love as if they were her own. She had just placed a stack of folded shirts into the suitcase when she heard the sound of running footsteps in the hallway. The door burst open. Eli and Jonah stood in the doorway, their faces flushed and tear-streaked, their chests heaving from having sprinted up 2 flights of stairs. They took in the scene before them, Sela, the open suitcase, the clothes being packed, and their worst fears were confirmed. No. Jonah's voice cracked on the word. No, no, no. Both boys rushed forward, throwing their arms around Sela's waist with such force that she stumbled backward against the bed. They clung to her desperately, their small bodies shaking with sobs. "Please, don't go." Eli cried into her side. "Please, Miss Sela. We're sorry." Jonah's voice was muffled against her stomach. "We're so sorry we got you in trouble." Sela's carefully maintained composure shattered. She sank to her knees on the floor, pulling both boys into her arms, holding them as tightly as they held her. Her own tears fell freely now, dropping onto their auburn hair. "Oh, my sweet boys," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is not your fault. Do you hear me? You did nothing wrong, nothing." "But Daddy's mad because of the prayer," Eli said, pulling back to look at her with red-rimmed eyes. "Because of what we asked you to teach us." Sela cupped his face in her hands, using her thumbs to wipe away his tears. "Your daddy isn't angry with you. He's not even really angry with me. He's hurting, sweetheart. He's been hurting for a long time." Jonah sniffled, his freckled face scrunched with confusion and pain. "Because of Mummy dying?" "Yes," Sela said gently. "When people lose someone they love very, very much, sometimes they get so sad that they don't know how to feel better. They push away things that remind them of their hurt. Your daddy loved your mummy so much that talking about her, or about heaven, or about God, it all reminds him of how much he misses her." Eli's lower lip trembled. "We miss her too. I know you do, baby. I know." Sela kissed the top of his head. "Is that why Daddy doesn't like us to talk about her?" Jonah asked, a new understanding dawning in his young eyes. "I think so," Sela replied. "Sometimes grown-ups think that if they don't talk about sad things, they won't have to feel sad anymore. But that's not really how it works." The three of them sat there on the floor, tangled together, while the afternoon light shifted across the room. Finally, Jonah pulled back slightly and looked up at Sela with his earnest grey eyes, so much like his father's. "Can we help Daddy not hurt anymore?" he asked. The question was so innocent, so full of a child's belief that love could fix anything, that Sela felt her heart break and mend simultaneously. "Oh, honey." She stroked his hair back from his forehead. "That's a beautiful question. I think the best thing you can do is keep loving him even when he acts grumpy or distant. Keep being patient with him, and maybe in time he'll learn that talking about your mommy and remembering her, that's actually a way of keeping her close, not pushing her away. Will time help him stop being sad?" Eli asked quietly. "Time and love," Sela said. "Those two things together are very powerful. And maybe," she hesitated, then continued softly, "maybe prayer too. But some grown-ups need longer to understand that. Your daddy's on his own journey, and we have to be patient with him." Jonah's face crumpled again. "But if you leave, who's going to help us? Who's going to help Daddy?" Sela had no answer for that. She simply held them closer, breathing in the scent of their shampoo, memorizing the weight of their small bodies against hers, knowing that these might be her last moments with them. "I will always, always care about you both," she whispered fiercely. "No matter where I am, that will never change. You are in my heart forever." Bennett Sinclair stood in the hallway outside Sela's bedroom door, frozen in place. He had come upstairs intending to check on his sons, to explain the situation in whatever limited way a father could explain adult decisions to 7-year-olds. He'd heard their voices coming from the 3rd floor, and followed the sound, climbing the narrow staircase that led to the staff quarters. The door to Sela's room stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, Bennett could see the three of them, Sela kneeling on the floor with his boys wrapped around her like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world. He should announce his presence, should interrupt, should maintain the boundary between employer and employee, between his family and the help, but he didn't. Instead, he stood in the shadows of the hallway and listened, watching through that narrow opening as a scene unfolded that would replay in his mind for years to come. The maternal tenderness in Sela's every movement struck him first. The way she touched the boys' faces, wiped their tears, held them close. It was the kind of physical affection Bennett had stopped being able to give somewhere in the fog of his grief. He hugged his sons, yes, but mechanically, distantly, without the full presence these moments required. Twinsℹ was fully present. Every word, every gesture, every expression conveyed absolute devotion to these children. "This is not your fault," she was saying, her voice breaking with emotion. "You did nothing wrong. Nothing." Bennett felt a stab of guilt. His sons thought they were responsible for this. They carried that burden, on top of everything else they carried. Then Eli asked the question that made Bennett's chest tighten. "But Daddy's mad because of the prayer, because of what we asked you to teach us." Bennett watched Twinsℹ cup his son's face with a gentleness that brought an unexpected burning to his eyes. "Your daddy isn't angry with you," she said. "He's not even really angry with me. He's hurting, sweetheart. He's been hurting for a long time." The words hit Bennett like a revelation. She understood. Without him ever having explained, without ever having opened up to her, she understood exactly what drove his anger and his rules and his emotional distance. How long had she known? How long had she been watching him with those perceptive eyes, seeing past his carefully maintained walls to the broken man underneath? "When people lose someone they love very, very much," Twinsℹ continued, speaking to the boys, but somehow also speaking directly to Bennett's hidden heart. "Sometimes they get so sad that they don't know how to feel better. They push away things that remind them of their hurt." "Yes," Bennett thought from his place in the hallway. "Yes, that's exactly it. Your daddy loved your mommy so much that talking about her, or about heaven, or about God, it all reminds him of how much he misses her." The accuracy of her insight was startling. She had articulated his pain better than he ever could have himself. Jonah's voice came next, tentative and seeking. "Is that why Daddy doesn't like us to talk about her?" "I think so. Sometimes grown-ups think that if they don't talk about sad things, they won't have to feel sad anymore. But that's not really how it works." Bennett leaned against the wall, his legs suddenly unsteady. She was right. Of course she was right. Silence hadn't made his grief disappear. It had only isolated him, trapped him in a prison of his own making. And worse, he'd forced his children into that same prison. Then came Jonah's question, the one that would haunt Bennett for the rest of the evening. "Can we help Daddy not hurt anymore?" Through the crack in the door, Bennett saw Twinsℹ's expression soften, with such profound compassion that it stole his breath. "Oh, honey, that's a beautiful question. I think the best thing you can do is keep loving him, even when he acts grumpy or distant. Keep loving him. Even when he acts grumpy or distant." His son's unconditional love, offered freely despite his failures as a father, felt like both a gift and an indictment. "Time and love," Twinsℹ was saying now. "Those two things together are very powerful. And maybe prayer too. But some grown-ups need longer to understand that. Your daddy's on his own journey, and we have to be patient with him." Bennett's eyes burned. When had anyone shown him this kind of grace? When had anyone acknowledged his pain while simultaneously pushing him toward healing? Then Eli spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I miss Mommy every day, but talking about her, it doesn't make me more sad. It makes me feel like she's still part of us." Bennett's hand flew to his mouth, suppressing a sound that might have been a sob. Jonah nodded vigorously. "Me too. I don't want to forget her. That's why we wanted to pray, so she wouldn't forget us either." They didn't want to forget Caroline. They wanted to keep her memory alive, to honor the mother who had loved them, to maintain a connection that Bennett had been trying desperately to sever. He had been wrong, catastrophically, painfully wrong. In trying to protect his sons from the pain of remembering, he had denied them the comfort of honoring their mother's memory. He had stolen from them the very thing that might have helped them heal. "I will always, always care about you both." Twinsℹ's voice drifted through the doorway, fierce and loving. "No matter where I am. That will never change. You are in my heart forever." Bennett backed away from the door silently, his hands shaking. He made it down the narrow staircase and halfway to his study before he had to stop, leaning against the wall in the empty corridor, his shoulders shaking with silent weeping. What had he done? Bennett's study welcomed him with familiar darkness. He didn't turn on the overhead lights. The late afternoon sun coming through the windows provided enough illumination, or perhaps he simply didn't want too much light exposing him right now. He collapsed into the leather chair behind his desk, dropping his head into his hands. The echo of Sela's words and his son's confessions played on repeat in his mind. I miss Mommy every day. Talking about her makes me feel like she's still part of us. I don't want to forget her. Your daddy's on his own journey. Bennett lifted his head and stared at the wedding photograph on his desk. Caroline smiled at him from behind the glass, frozen at 28 years old. Forever young, forever happy, forever gone. I don't know what to do, he whispered to her image. I thought I was protecting them. I thought... His voice trailed off. What had he thought? That banning Caroline's memory would make losing her easier. That silence would be less painful than remembrance? His gaze drifted to the bottom drawer of his desk, the locked drawer he hadn't opened in 3 years. His hand moved almost of its own volition, reaching into his pocket for his keys. The small brass key fit the lock perfectly. The drawer slid open with a soft whisper of wood on wood. Inside sat a wooden box, nothing fancy, just a simple cedar container that Caroline had used for keeping special mementos. Bennett lifted it out carefully, as if it might shatter, and placed it on the desk in front of him. His hands hesitated on the lid. Once opened, there would be no going back. The memories he had worked so hard to contain would flood out, and he wasn't sure he was strong enough to withstand them. But Sela's words echoed again. Sometimes grown-ups think that if they don't talk about sad things, they won't have to feel sad anymore. But that's not really how it works. Bennett opened the box. The smell hit him first, lavender and something else, something distinctly Caroline. Her perfume had long since faded from the clothes he'd donated, from the sheets he'd replaced, from every corner of the house he'd systematically purged. But here, in this sealed box, traces of her scent remained. He lifted out the contents one by one. Caroline's wedding ring, still sized for her slender finger. He'd been unable to bury her with it. The thought of putting it in the ground had been unbearable. A bundle of letters they'd written to each other during his early business trips, before the twins were born. Her handwriting, looping, elegant, full of personality. A pressed flower from their first anniversary. A hospital bracelet from when the twins were born, still bearing her name, Caroline E. Sinclair. And beneath everything else, her Bible. Bennett lifted it out with trembling hands. It was a well-worn King James version, its leather cover softened by years of use, its spine cracked from being opened thousands of times. A burgundy ribbon marked a page somewhere in the middle. He hadn't touched this book since the funeral. The pastor had asked if the family wanted it for the service, and Bennett had nearly thrown it at him. Now, sitting in the dimming light of his study, Bennett opened to the marked page. The book fell open to Psalm 147, 3. Several verses were underlined in Caroline's delicate pencil marks, but one stood out, highlighted and annotated in the margin. He heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. Next to it, in Caroline's handwriting, was a note. Read this to B when he's struggling. Remind him. Bennett's vision blurred with tears. He remembered when she had marked this verse. It was after his business partner had died suddenly of a heart attack. Bennett had been devastated, guilt-ridden, drowning in what-ifs. Caroline had sat with him late one night, this Bible open in her lap, and read him this passage. God sees your broken heart, she had told him gently. And he's in the business of healing, not abandoning. Wounds don't heal overnight, but they do heal. You just have to let them. Bennett had eventually found peace with his partner's death. Caroline had guided him through that grief with patience and faith. Now she was gone, and he was broken again. But this time, he had pushed away the very faith that might have helped him heal. He had banned the prayers that might have comforted him. He had isolated himself from the God Caroline had trusted so completely. He heals the broken-hearted. Could that be true? Could there be healing for someone who had turned his back on prayer, who had raged against heaven, who had built walls so high that even his own children couldn't reach him? Bennett closed the Bible carefully, holding it against his chest. For the first time in 3 years he allowed himself to speak to God, not in anger, not in bargaining, but in raw, honest confession. "I don't know if you're listening," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know if I have any right to ask. But I need help. My boys need help. I've been doing this all wrong, and I don't know how to fix it." He paused, tears streaming down his face. "Caroline would be so disappointed in me. She'd be ashamed of how I've kept the boys from her memory, from you, from everything she believed in. I thought I was protecting them, but Sailor was right. I've been hurting them." His grip tightened on the Bible. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to grieve and parent and heal all at the same time. But I know I can't do it alone anymore. I need Sailor. I need her wisdom, her faith, her help. And I need to make this right before I lose everything that matters." Bennett sat in silence for a long moment, then carefully placed Caroline's Bible on his desk where the photograph had been. He returned the other items to the wooden box, leaving the drawer unlocked this time. No more hiding, no more running. It was time to face what he'd been avoiding. It was time to make things right. Bennett found them in the kitchen. The twins sat at the breakfast bar on high stools, their faces swollen from crying, their small hands wrapped around glasses of juice that Sailor must have poured for them. Sailor herself stood at the sink with her back to the doorway, her shoulders tense beneath a simple peach-colored blouse. She had changed out of her uniform. The realization hit Bennett with unexpected force. She was preparing to leave, to walk out of this house, and out of their lives, and she had already begun the transition from employee back to her own person. 2 modest suitcases sat by the back door, packed and ready. Bennett's arrival in the doorway drew everyone's attention immediately. The twins turned toward him with expressions caught between hope and fear. Sailor turned as well, her hands gripping the edge of the sink behind her, her spine straight. For the first time, Bennett truly looked at her, not as his employee, not as the help, but as Sailor Thompson, a woman who had sacrificed her own education to care for a dying grandmother, a woman who had endured her own losses, yet maintained her faith through it all, a woman who had taken a job caring for his children and had given them something far more valuable than supervision. She had given them love. "Boys," Bennett said quietly, his voice still rough from crying, "could you give Miss Thompson and me a few minutes to talk?" "But Dad," Jonah started. "Please," Bennett added, and something in his tone, gentler now almost, pleading, made both twins slide off their stools without further protest. Eli paused beside his father, looking up at him with those perceptive grey eyes. "Are you still mad, Daddy?" Bennett knelt down to his son's level, placing both hands on the boy's shoulders. "I was never mad at you, not for a second, and He glanced at Sailor briefly, then back to Eli. "I'm trying very hard not to be mad at all anymore. I'm trying to do better. Okay?" Eli nodded slowly, then surprised Bennett by throwing his arms around his neck in a fierce hug. Jonah joined a second later, and Bennett held both his sons tightly, breathing them in. "I love you both," he whispered. "So much. I'm sorry if I haven't shown that well enough." When the twins finally released him and left the kitchen, Bennett straightened and turned his full attention to Sailor. She hadn't moved from her position by the sink, but he saw the tears glistening in her eyes. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. "Miss Thompson," Bennett began, then stopped. "Sailor, I need to say something, and I'm not very good at this, so please bear with me." She nodded fractionally. Bennett took a breath. "I may have reacted poorly earlier." The understatement hung in the air. Sailor's eyebrows rose slightly, but she remained silent. "You were right," Bennett continued, forcing the words out. "About everything. The boys do need more than just basic care. They need someone who sees their pain and knows how to address it. Someone who isn't afraid to give them comfort, even when it's complicated." He moved closer, his hands flexing at his sides with nervous energy. "I overheard you," he admitted. "Upstairs with the boys. I heard what you told them about why I've been the way I've been. And you were more insightful about my own grief than I've ever been." Sailor's expression softened. "Mr. Sinclair." "Bennett," he interrupted gently. "Please, just Bennett." She hesitated, then nodded. Bennett, I didn't mean to overstep. I genuinely— You didn't overstep, Bennett said firmly. Or rather, you did, but you were right to. I've been so focused on avoiding my own pain that I didn't see how my rules were hurting Eli and Jonah. They don't want to forget Caroline. They shouldn't have to forget her. She was their mother, she loved them, and I've been denying them the right to remember that love. His voice cracked on the last word. After Caroline died, Bennett continued, staring at a point just past Sela's shoulder. Because looking directly at her was too difficult, I prayed in the hospital chapel. I begged God to save her. I promised everything I had, and when she died anyway, I felt betrayed, abandoned. I decided that if God wouldn't answer my prayers, then prayer itself was meaningless. He finally met Sela's eyes. I banned it from the house because I couldn't bear to be reminded of that betrayal. Every time I heard someone mention God or faith or heaven, it was like reopening the wound. So I just shut it all out, shut everyone out. Sela's tears spilled over now, tracking down her cheeks. I understand, she said softly. I've felt that anger too. I know you have, Bennett replied. That's what makes you qualified to help my boys in ways I can't. You've walked through grief and came out the other side without losing your faith. They need that example. They need your strength. He paused, swallowing hard. I need it too, he admitted. I can't do this alone anymore. I've been trying for 3 years, and all I've done is build walls that keep everyone at a distance, including my own children. You broke through those walls somehow. You made this house feel less like a mausoleum and more like a home. Sela wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. What are you saying? Bennett took a deep breath. I'm saying I don't want you to leave. I'm saying I was wrong to fire you. I'm saying that if you're willing to stay, I promise to be more open, to let the boys talk about their mother, to allow them to explore faith, if that brings them comfort. I can't promise I'll be comfortable with it all immediately, but I'll try. He gestured helplessly. I'm asking you to be patient with me while I figure out how to be a better father, while I learn to heal instead of just surviving. Sela studied him for a long moment, searching his face. Will things really be different? She asked quietly. I can't stay if the boys are going to feel afraid or guilty for mentioning their mother or wanting to pray. Things will be different, Bennett promised. I'm not asking you to pretend this afternoon didn't happen. I'm asking for a chance to do better, starting now. And if the boys ask to pray again— Bennett's jaw tightened, old instincts flaring, but he pushed through. Then you can help them. I might not participate right away, but I won't forbid it anymore. That's not fair to them. It's not fair to Caroline's memory. Sela's expression shifted, hope dawning cautiously in her eyes. You mean that? I do, Bennett said. I found Caroline's Bible in my desk just now. There was a verse she'd marked for me about God healing the broken-hearted. I think she'd want me to let that healing happen, for me, for the boys, and maybe having you here, with your faith and your patience, maybe that's part of how that healing is supposed to work. A smile broke through Sela's tears. I'll stay, she said. Of course I'll stay. I care about this family. I care about— She stopped herself, but Bennett heard what she didn't say. Thank you, he said simply. Thank you for caring. Thank you for not giving up on us. Before either could say more, the kitchen door burst open, and 2 small bodies flew into the room. Is Sela staying? Eli demanded, looking between the adults with desperate hope. Please say yes, Jonah added, grabbing his father's hand. Bennett looked down at his sons, then over at Sela, who was smiling through her tears. Yes, he said, his own voice thick with emotion. She's staying. The twins erupted in cheers, running to Sela and throwing their arms around her waist. She laughed and held them close, her eyes meeting Bennett's over their heads. Come here, Bennett said gruffly, holding out his arms. For the first time in 3 years, Bennett Sinclair pulled his entire household into an embrace. His sons, and the woman who had dared to break his rules because she loved these children enough to risk everything. 4 people, holding each other in a kitchen filled with late afternoon light, surrounded by the promise of new beginnings. The Sinclair mansion had been cold for so long, but in that moment, it finally began to feel warm again. The change didn't happen overnight. Healing never does. But in the weeks following that afternoon in the kitchen, something fundamental shifted in the Sinclair household, like a season turning, gradual but undeniable. It started with small gestures, tentative steps toward a new way of living. The first evening after Selah stayed, Bennett came to dinner and found his sons with their hands already folded, waiting. They looked at him with cautious eyes, uncertain whether this new permission would hold. Bennett's throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at him to redirect them, to maintain control, to stop this before old wounds reopened. But he remembered Eli's words. Talking about her makes me feel like she's still part of us. So instead of speaking, Bennett simply pulled out his chair, sat down, and bowed his head. The twins' faces lit up with surprise and joy. "Thank you, God, for this food," Jonah said quickly, as if afraid the opportunity might vanish. "And for Daddy coming home safe, and for Miss Selah staying." "Amen." "Amen," Eli echoed. Bennett lifted his head, his eyes burning. "Amen," he whispered. Across the table, Selah's smile was gentle and encouraging, asking nothing more from him than what he was able to give. The prayers remained brief at first, simple gratitudes offered by the boys, while Bennett sat with his head bowed and his heart slowly, painfully learning to soften. He didn't pray aloud himself, not yet, but he stopped fighting the practice in his home, and that alone felt monumental. Then came the photographs. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Eli asked if they could look at pictures of Mommy. Bennett's first instinct was to deflect, but he caught Selah's eye across the room and saw her quiet faith in him. He retrieved the photo albums from the hall closet, albums he hadn't touched since the funeral. They spread them across the living room floor, all four of them, turning pages and remembering. The twins asked questions. Where was this taken? Why is Mummy laughing? Is that us when we were babies? Bennett answered haltingly at first, then with growing ease. He told them about their mother's terrible sense of direction, how she once got lost driving to the grocery store she'd been to 100 times. He described her obsession with planting flowers, even though she could barely keep them alive. He shared how she sang off-key in the shower every morning and refused to drink coffee without an absurd amount of cream. The boys laughed. Selah listened with interest, and Bennett discovered something unexpected. Talking about Caroline didn't make the grief worse. It transformed it into something bearable, a sweet ache rather than a sharp wound. "She would have loved seeing how big you've grown," Bennett told his sons, touching a photo of Caroline holding newborn twins. "She'd be so proud of the young men you're becoming." Eli leaned against his father's shoulder. "I wish I could remember her better. That's why we have these," Bennett said, gesturing to the albums, "and we can look at them whenever you want. She'll always be part of this family." The transformation extended beyond the house as well. Bennett started leaving his study earlier in the evenings. He began accepting fewer weekend business calls. One Sunday, he suggested they all drive to Folly Beach for the afternoon, something he hadn't done since Caroline died. The four of them walked along the shore, the twins running ahead to chase sandpipers while Bennett and Selah strolled behind, watching. The ocean breeze caught Selah's hair, pulling strands loose from her usual neat bun. She laughed as Jonah nearly tumbled into a tidal pool, and the sound made Bennett's chest feel strangely warm. "You're smiling more, Dad," Eli observed one evening at dinner, his statement matter-of-fact but weighted with meaning. Bennett glanced at Selah, who was helping Jonah cut his chicken. "I suppose I am," he admitted. "It's because Miss Selah is here," Jonah announced with the brutal honesty of 7-year-olds. "You're happier when she's around." Bennett felt his face warm, and across the table, Selah's cheeks darkened with a blush. But neither of them denied it. As the boundaries between employer and employee continued to blur, Bennett found himself genuinely curious about the woman who had upended his carefully ordered world. They fell into a routine of evening conversations after the twins went to bed, sometimes in the kitchen over coffee, sometimes on the back porch where the night air carried the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of crickets. It was during one of these conversations that Bennett learned about Sailor's education. "You studied early childhood education?" he asked, genuinely surprised. He had assumed she'd taken the housekeeping position because she lacked other options, not because life had redirected her path. Sailor nodded, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. 2 years at a community college near Hartsville. I was planning to transfer to a 4-year program and become an elementary school teacher. What happened? My grandmother got sick. Sailor's voice held no bitterness, only acceptance. Congestive heart failure. She needed full-time care, and I was all she had. So I left school and moved back home to take care of her. Bennett studied her face in the soft porch light. That must have been difficult. Giving up your dreams. It was the right choice, Sailor said simply. Grandmother Nettie May raised me from the time I was 5. She sacrificed everything for me. How could I do any less for her? Still, Bennett pressed, you must have felt some regret. Sailor considered this. Sometimes. But I also learned that our plans aren't always God's plans. He had different work for me to do, caring for my grandmother through her final years, then finding my way here to your family. Maybe that was the path I was supposed to walk all along. The faith in her voice, the certainty that even detours had purpose, stirred something in Bennett. He wanted that kind of peace, that ability to trust in something larger than his own understanding. Tell me about her, he said. Your grandmother. Sailor's face softened with affection. She was a force of nature. Tiny woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she had the presence of someone twice that size. She loved the Lord fiercely, and loved people the same way. She used to say that faith without works is dead, so she was always feeding someone, helping someone, praying for someone. She sounds remarkable. She was. She taught me that strength doesn't mean never bending, it means bending without breaking, and that the worst thing you can do with pain is waste it. You're supposed to let it teach you, shape you, make you more compassionate. Bennett absorbed this wisdom silently. How much pain had he wasted by refusing to let it transform him? As the days passed, the conversations deepened. One evening, under a sky scattered with stars, Sailor shared something. She had told very few people the story of her fiancé, Marcus. We met in college, she said softly. He was studying engineering. We were planning to get married after graduation. What happened? Bennett asked gently, though he could guess from the sorrow in her voice. Leukemia. Aggressive and sudden. He went from healthy to gone in 6 months. Sailor's hands tightened around her mug. I prayed so hard for his healing, begged God to save him, and when Marcus died anyway, I was angry. So angry at God for not answering. Bennett felt a shock of recognition. How did you move past that anger? Time, Sailor said, and a choice. I realized I could either let that loss destroy my faith or let it deepen it. I chose to believe that God's not answering the way I wanted didn't mean he wasn't listening. It just meant his plan was different from mine. She turned to look at Bennett directly. I still miss Marcus. I probably always will. But that grief taught me empathy. It taught me how to sit with other people's pain without needing to fix it or explain it away. In a strange way, losing him prepared me to help your boys, to understand what you were going through, even when you couldn't explain it yourself. Bennett reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her with deliberate intention, not by accident. Her fingers were warm and small in his palm. I'm sorry you went through that, he said. But I'm grateful, selfishly grateful, that it brought you here. I don't know what we would have done without you. Sailor squeezed his hand gently. You would have found your way. But I'm glad I could walk part of the journey with you. They sat like that for a long time, hands linked, sharing the comfortable silence of 2 people who had found understanding in unexpected places. The shift from friendship to something deeper happened so gradually that neither could pinpoint the exact moment everything changed. It was in the small moments, the spaces between words. Bennett found himself noticing things he had never paid attention to before, the way Sailor hummed while cooking, the graceful efficiency of her movements, the warmth in her eyes when she looked at his sons, when she laughed, really laughed with her whole heart, It filled the house with a lightness he hadn't known he was missing. One morning, as Bennett prepared to leave for the office, Selah noticed his tie was slightly crooked. Without thinking, she reached up to straighten it, her fingers brushing against his collar. "There," she said, smoothing the fabric. "Now you look like the successful businessman you are." Bennett caught her hand before she could pull away, holding it gently against his chest. "Thank you," he said quietly, his eyes searching hers. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Selah's breath caught. Bennett's thumb traced a small circle on the back of her hand. Then Jonah's voice shattered the moment. "Dad, I can't find my math homework." Selah stepped back quickly, her cheeks flushed. Bennett released her hand reluctantly, already mourning the loss of contact. The awareness between them grew impossible to ignore. When a summer thunderstorm knocked out the power one evening, they lit candles throughout the house and made an adventure of it. The twins insisted on building a fort in the living room using couch cushions and blankets. All four of them crowded inside the makeshift shelter, Bennett's tall frame barely fitting. A particularly loud crack of thunder made Selah jump, and instinctively she grabbed Bennett's arm. He covered her hand with his own, their fingers intertwining naturally. "It's just noise," he murmured. "We're safe." But even after the thunder passed, neither of them let go. The twins noticed, of course. Children always do. "Daddy smiles different now," Eli commented to his brother one afternoon, not realizing Bennett could hear from the hallway. "What do you mean, different?" Jonah asked. Like he means it. Like he's really happy, not just pretending." "It's because of Miss Selah," Jonah said with certainty. "I think Daddy likes her. Likes her. Should we help them?" Eli wondered. "Help them what?" "Get together. Like in the movies Mom used to watch." Bennett retreated before he could hear Jonah's response, his heart beating faster. Did his children want this? Would they welcome Selah not just as a caretaker but as something more? And more importantly, what did Selah want? Bennett wrestled with doubt. The differences between them seemed vast: race, class, background, education. Charleston society could be cruel to those who stepped outside expected boundaries. Would pursuing something with Selah subject her to judgment and prejudice? Would it complicate her position in the household? Selah battled her own uncertainties. She caught herself watching Bennett when he didn't know, memorizing the way his eyes crinkled when he genuinely smiled, the deep timbre of his voice when he read bedtime stories to the twins. She noticed how he'd begun touching her more often, a hand on her shoulder as he passed, fingers brushing. When they both reached for the same dish, his palm at the small of her back when they walked together. But was it real? Or was she simply convenient? The woman already in his home, already caring for his children. She'd heard stories of wealthy men who pursued the help without serious intentions. Was Bennett different? Or was she letting hope cloud her judgment? Late one night, unable to sleep, Selah prayed for clarity. "Lord, I don't know what this is between us. I don't know if I'm reading too much into kindness, but if there's something real here, something you've ordained, please make it clear. And if I'm meant to just be their caretaker and nothing more, help me accept that with grace." Neither Bennett nor Selah knew that within days, a crisis would force every unspoken feeling into the light. Neither knew that sometimes God answers prayers in the most unexpected ways, through danger, through desperation, through moments when pretense becomes impossible and only truth remains. The storm was coming, and it would change everything. The Sunday morning dawned clear and beautiful, giving no hint of the chaos that would arrive by afternoon. Selah left early for church services at New Hope Baptist, the small congregation, across town where she'd been attending since moving to Charleston. She invited the Sinclair family to join her. She'd been extending the invitation every week, gently and without pressure. "Not yet," Bennett said, but his tone was softer than it would have been months ago. "But maybe soon." The qualifier, "maybe soon," represented enormous progress, and Selah's smile told him she recognized that. Bennett decided to take the twins to the Charleston Children's Museum, something he'd been promising for weeks. It would be a good day, he thought. Quality time with his sons, followed by an evening with all of them together. The museum visit went beautifully. Eli lost himself in the water table exhibit, engineering elaborate dam systems. Jonah climbed the indoor treehouse until the staff gently asked him to give other children a turn. Bennett watched them play with a fullness in his chest that felt like contentment, a feeling he'd almost forgotten existed. They left the museum at 3:30, planning to be home well before dinner. That's when Bennett's phone erupted with emergency alerts. Severe thunderstorm warning. Flash flood watch. Seek shelter immediately. Bennett glanced at the sky. Dark clouds were massing on the western horizon, rolling in faster than seemed natural. The air had that strange greenish quality that often preceded violent weather. "Come on, boys," he said, ushering them toward the parking garage. "We need to get home." The first raindrops hit as they pulled onto the highway. Within minutes, it became a deluge. Sheets of water so thick that Bennett's wipers could barely keep up. Traffic slowed to a crawl. "Dad, I'm scared," Eli said from the back seat, watching water stream down the windows. "We're okay," Bennett reassured him, though his own hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Just a thunderstorm. We'll be home soon." But the main routes quickly became congested. Bennett made a split, second decision to take the back roads, the winding route through less developed areas that would bypass the traffic. It was a decision he would replay in his mind countless times afterward. Meanwhile, across town, Seela's church service ran long. The pastor, sensing the congregation's anxiety about the weather, offered prayers for safety and protection. By the time Seela made it to her car, the storm had fully arrived. She tried calling Bennett, no answer. Probably driving, she reasoned. She sent a text. "Are you and the boys home safe?" No response. A growing unease settled in her stomach as she navigated the flooded streets toward the Sinclair estate. Something felt wrong. She couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it, but the feeling persisted, urgent and insistent. Bennett's SUV handled the back roads well initially, its high clearance managing the standing water. But as he approached the small bridge over Cypress Creek, he encountered a situation he hadn't anticipated. The creek had overflowed. What was normally a gentle stream had transformed into a raging torrent, spilling across the low-lying road. Bennett slowed, trying to assess the depth. The water didn't look too high. The bridge was still visible. He'd crossed flooded roads before. He pressed forward. The front wheels of the SUV found the bridge, but the current was stronger than it appeared. Water pushed against the vehicle's side, and suddenly, with a sickening lurch, the back wheels slipped off the pavement where the road had washed away. The SUV tilted violently. Jonah screamed. Eli grabbed for his brother's hand. "Hold on!" Bennett shouted, trying to correct, but the vehicle was wedged, front wheels on solid ground, back end sinking into rushing water. The engine died. Water began seeping in through the door seals. Bennett's military-like calm took over. "Boys, listen to me carefully. We need to get out of the car right now." He tried his door, jammed against mud and debris. The passenger side door opened, but water immediately rushed in, higher than he'd realized. The current was powerful, pulling at the vehicle. "Unbuckle," Bennett commanded, climbing into the back seat. He grabbed Jonah first, then Eli, holding both boys against his chest. "When we get outside, hold on to me as tight as you can. Don't let go for anything. Understand?" Both boys nodded, their faces pale with terror. Bennett kicked open the passenger door fully and stepped out into waist-deep, fast-moving water. The current immediately tried to sweep his legs out from under him. He was a strong man, athletic and tall, but the force of the water shocked him. Holding both boys with one arm, he used his free hand to grab the vehicle's roof rack, steadying himself. Then he began the terrifying journey toward solid ground, fighting the current with every step. Water rushed around his chest now. The boys clung to him, soaking wet, crying. Behind them, the SUV shifted ominously, caught in the current's grip. 20 feet, 15, 10. Bennett's foot slipped on slick mud, and for one heart-stopping moment, he thought they would all go under. But he caught himself, muscles screaming, and pushed forward. 5 feet. Then his feet found purchase on the road above the floodline. They collapsed onto the wet pavement, all three gasping and shaking. The rain continued to pound down, lightning cracking across the sky. Bennett pulled his sons close, checking them frantically for injuries. "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" "I'm scared, Daddy," Jonah sobbed. "Me too, buddy," Bennett admitted, his voice shaking. "Me too." Eli pointed back toward the creek. Their SUV was slowly sliding off the bridge, caught by the current. They watched it disappear into the brown water. Bennett looked around. They were a mile from home, maybe more. The rain showed no signs of stopping. Both boys were soaking wet and beginning to shiver despite the lingering warmth. He had no phone. It had been in the cup holder, now underwater somewhere downstream. For the first time in 3 years, Bennett Sinclair did something he swore he'd never do again. He prayed. Not the angry prayers of the hospital chapel, not the desperate bargaining of a man trying to negotiate with God, just a simple, honest plea from a father terrified of failing his children. "God, please, keep them safe. Give me strength. Help us get home." He opened his eyes, pulled his sons to their feet, and began walking through the storm toward home. Sailor arrived at the estate to find it empty and dark. Bennett's SUV wasn't in the garage. No lights shone in the windows. No sounds of the boys' voices echoed through the halls. The unease that had been building in her chest transformed into full-blown fear. She tried Bennett's phone again, straight to voicemail. She checked the museum's website, closed early due to weather. They should have been home an hour ago. "Lord, where are they?" she whispered, staring out at the storm. Then, without fully understanding why, she grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, pulled on a rain jacket, and walked out into the storm. She followed her instincts down the long driveway, then onto the main road heading toward town. Rain lashed at her face. Her shoes squelched through standing water. Lightning illuminated the world in brief, stark flashes. And then, in the beam of her flashlight, she saw them. 3 figures walking slowly up the road, a tall man with a small boy. On each side, all of them drenched and stumbling with exhaustion. Bennett. Sailor's scream cut through the storm. All 3 heads jerked up. "Miss Sailor." Jonah's cry was pure relief. The twins broke away from their father and ran toward her as fast as their exhausted legs could carry them. Sailor dropped to her knees and caught them both, wrapping her arms around their shaking bodies. "Oh, thank God," she sobbed, holding them tight. "Thank God you're safe." "We almost drowned," Jonah cried into her shoulder. "The car got stuck and there was so much water and—" "Shh, baby, I've got you. You're okay now. You're okay." Bennett reached them, and Sailor looked up at him. His face was drawn with exhaustion, his clothes plastered to his body, his eyes hollow with the aftermath of adrenaline. Without thinking, Sailor rose and threw her arms around him, one hand still holding each twin close. "Thank God you're okay," she whispered fiercely against his chest. Bennett's arms came around her, crushing her close. One arm encircled Sailor, the other gathered both boys in. They stood in the middle of the road in the pouring rain, holding each other as if they could merge into one being. "I was so scared," Sailor breathed. "I came home, and you weren't here, and I knew something was wrong." "We're okay," Bennett said hoarsely. "We're safe now." Sailor pulled back just enough to cup his face in her hands, rainwater streaming between them. Then, impulsively, she pressed her lips to his cheek, a kiss of gratitude, of relief, of something deeper she couldn't name. Bennett's breath caught. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, holding her close for just a moment longer. "Let's get you all inside," Sailor said, her voice shaking. "Come on." Together, they made their way up the driveway to the house. The power was out, so Sailor lit candles and built a fire in the living room. Fireplace, something she'd never done before, but adrenaline made her capable. She wrapped the twins in warm blankets, made hot cocoa on the gas stove, and fussed over all 3 of them until Bennett gently caught her hands. "Sailor, stop. We're okay." She looked at him, really looked at him, and burst into tears. Bennett pulled her into his arms again, and this time there was no storm, no crisis, no excuse except need. He held her while she shook with a release of fear, stroking her back, murmuring reassurance. The twins, wrapped in their blankets and exhausted from the ordeal, curled up on the couch near the fire. Within minutes both were asleep. Bennett and Selah sank to the floor in front of the fireplace, sitting close, shoulders touching. The candlelight flickered across their faces. The storm continued outside, but inside felt warm and safe. "I prayed," Bennett said quietly. Selah turned to look at him, her eyes widening. Out there in the water, holding the boys, terrified I wouldn't be able to get them to safety. "I prayed. For the first time in 3 years, I really prayed. Not angry, not bargaining, just asking for help." Tears slipped down Selah's cheeks. "And he answered." "He did," Bennett agreed, wonder in his voice. "I felt it, Selah. I felt something give me strength when I had none left. I felt not alone." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "You brought that back into my life," he said. "You brought faith back, hope back. You brought joy I thought I'd never feel again. You've transformed my children. You've transformed this house. You've transformed me." "Bennett, I care about you," he interrupted gently, "more than I ever expected to care about anyone again. You're not just my employee. You haven't been for a long time. You're everything." Selah's breath caught. "I care about you too," she whispered. "So much that it scares me sometimes." Bennett reached up and cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear. "Don't be scared." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and tentative at first, then deeper as 3 years of loneliness and grief gave way to hope and healing and the beginning of something new. When they finally parted, both were crying and smiling at the same time. A small voice from the couch interrupted. "Does this mean Miss Selah is your girlfriend now, Dad?" Bennett and Selah turned to find Eli awake, watching them with sleepy contentment. Jonah sat up too, rubbing his eyes. "I knew it," he announced triumphantly. "I told you, Eli." Bennett laughed, a real, full laugh, and pulled Selah closer. "Is that okay with you two?" "Yes." Both boys chorused. "Now our family won't be so sad anymore," Eli said simply. And in that moment, with candlelight dancing on the walls and 4 hearts beating together, the Sinclair house finally became a home again. If this moment touched your heart, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Do you believe love can find us in the most unexpected places? Do you believe that the people who challenge us most might be exactly the people we need? This family went from broken to whole, not because their pain disappeared, but because they finally let someone help them carry it. If you know someone who's built walls around their heart, someone who's afraid to hope, again, someone who needs to hear this message, share this story with them right now. And if you haven't already subscribed to Mr. Roman's Story Vault, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and join our family. Because the best stories are the ones that remind us we're not alone. Now, let's bring this journey home. The transition from employer-employee to couple didn't happen in secret for long. Bennett Sinclair was a prominent figure in Charleston's business community, and people noticed when the widowed Millionaire began appearing in public with his African-American housekeeper, not as staff but as his partner. The first whispers started at a charity fundraiser Bennett attended with Selah. By his side, introduced simply as someone very important to me and my family. She wore a simple navy dress that Bennett had insisted on buying for her, though she'd protested the expense. Her natural elegance and warm smile drew attention immediately. So did the color of her skin next to his. Charleston had progressed, certainly, but old prejudices died hard in some circles. "I heard he's dating the help," someone murmured behind them at the cocktail hour, not quite quietly enough. How progressive of him. The word dripped with condescension. Bennett's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Selah placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Let it go," she whispered. "Their opinions don't define us." But when a business associate made a more direct comment, suggesting that Bennett was going through some kind of crisis and should think about what this looks like, Bennett's patience evaporated. "What it looks like," Bennett said coldly, "is a man who found someone extraordinary after years of darkness. Someone who saved my family when we were falling apart. Someone who has more integrity, compassion, and strength than anyone in this room, including me." He took Sela's hand firmly. "And if that makes you uncomfortable, that's your problem, not mine." The associate sputtered. "Bennett, I just meant—" "I know exactly what you meant," Bennett interrupted. "And I think we're done here." He led Sela away, leaving stunned silence in their wake. Later, in the car, Sela was quiet. "I'm sorry," Bennett said. "I know that was uncomfortable." "You defended me," Sela replied softly, looking at him with shining eyes. "No one's ever done that before." "Not like that. I'll do it every single time," Bennett promised. "Anyone who can't see your worth isn't worth my time or my business." And he meant it. In the weeks that followed, Bennett discovered who his real friends were. Some colleagues surprised him with their acceptance and support. Others showed their true colors through subtle and not so subtle disapproval. Bennett cut ties without hesitation. His social circle shrank, but the people who remained were genuine. And Sela, with her quiet dignity and sincere kindness, won over even the skeptics eventually. She never responded to rudeness with rudeness. She simply lived her truth with grace. The adversity they faced only strengthened their bond. Every challenge overcome together became proof that what they had was real, deep, and worth fighting for. They were building something that couldn't be shaken by gossip or prejudice. They were building a family. It started the way the most important things often do, with children speaking truth before adults realize what's happening. 3 months into Bennett and Sela's relationship, Jonah was telling Sela about his day at school. When he casually said, "And then I told my teacher that my mama Sela helped me with my homework." Sela froze, a dish towel in her hands. "What did you call me, honey?" Jonah looked up, uncertain. "Mama Sela. Is that okay?" Tears sprang to Sela's eyes immediately. She knelt down and pulled the boy into a tight hug. "Oh, sweetheart, that's more than okay." Eli, overhearing from the next room, came running. "Does that mean we can both call you that?" "If you want to," Sela managed through her tears. "I would be so honored." Bennett, watching from the doorway, felt his own eyes burn. The boys weren't trying to replace Caroline. They spoke of their mother, often now, keeping her memory alive through stories and photographs. But they were making room in their hearts for another kind of love, another mother figure to help guide them through life. That evening, Bennett sat the boys down for a serious conversation. "I want you both to know," he said carefully, "that loving Sela doesn't mean forgetting Mommy. Your mom will always be your mom. She gave you life, and she loved you more than anything." "We know, Dad," Eli said solemnly. "Mama Sela told us that too. She says Mommy Caroline would be happy we have someone to take care of us." "She's right," Bennett agreed. "Your mom would have loved Sela, and she'd be proud of the kind, loving boys you're becoming." The household transformed in visible ways. Laughter echoed through halls that had been silent for years. The kitchen became a gathering place rather than just a workspace. Bennett started coming home at reasonable hours, prioritizing dinner with his family over late meetings. He learned to apologize when he was wrong, to his children, to Sela, to himself. Each night before bed, following Sela's gentle suggestion, they shared what they were grateful for that day. "I'm grateful for second chances," Bennett said one evening, his eyes on Sela. She smiled back. "I'm grateful for families that choose each other." The twins were grateful for everything from pizza night to the new puppy they'd convinced their father to adopt. Their house had become a home at last. 6 months after the storm, Bennett did something he never thought he'd do again. He went to church. Sela had continued her gentle Sunday invitations without pressure, and the twins had started asking to go with her. Finally, one Saturday evening, Bennett took a deep breath and said, "We'll all go together tomorrow." The joy on Sela's face made his nervousness worthwhile. New Hope Baptist was nothing like the grand Episcopal church where Bennett had married Caroline. It was a modest brick building in a predominantly black neighborhood with a congregation. That welcomed the Sinclair family with open arms and curious glances. Bennett held Sailor's hand as they entered, the twins between them. The service was different from what Bennett remembered. More music, more spontaneous prayer, more expressions of emotion. When the choir sang, the whole building seemed to vibrate with faith and joy. Then they began a hymn Bennett recognized, "Great is Thy Faithfulness." Caroline had loved this hymn. She'd hummed it while cooking, sung it while gardening. Hearing it now, Bennett's throat tightened with emotion. Sailor squeezed his hand, understanding without words. As the congregation sang, Bennett found his own voice joining in, rusty and uncertain at first, then stronger. Tears streamed down his face. Tears of grief, yes, but also of healing, of gratitude, of coming home to something he'd lost. When the pastor invited the congregation to pray, Bennett bowed his head willingly. The prayers became a regular part of his private life as well. Not the desperate bargaining of the hospital chapel, but conversations, sometimes grateful, sometimes questioning, always honest. He prayed for his children's well-being. He prayed for wisdom as a father. He prayed thanks for Sailor and the transformation she'd brought to their lives. One night, alone in his study, Bennett spoke to Caroline as well, something he hadn't allowed himself to do in years. "I hope you're okay with this," he whispered, looking at her photograph. "I hope you know I'll never forget you. But I think I'm finally learning to live again, and I think you'd want that for me, for the boys." In the silence that followed, Bennett felt something he could only describe as peace. The kind of peace that surpasses understanding. The kind of peace he thought he'd never find again. Bennett planned the proposal for a golden October evening, exactly 1 year after that. Fateful afternoon when he'd come home early and found Sailor teaching his boys to pray. He'd been carrying his grandmother's engagement ring in his pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. The ring was a simple but elegant design, a single diamond on a platinum band. His grandmother had worn it for 53 years before she passed, and his mother had given it to Bennett before Caroline. Caroline had loved it, but she'd passed it back to his mother before she died, saying, "Keep it safe. Bennett might need it again someday." At the time, Bennett had been appalled at the suggestion. Now he understood Caroline's wisdom and generosity even in her final days. The twins were in on the plan. Bennett had asked their permission first, wanting to ensure they were truly comfortable with this next step. "Are you going to ask Mama Sella to marry you?" Eli had asked, eyes wide. "I'd like to, but only if you boys are okay with it." "Yes," Jonah had shouted, pumping his fist. "Can we help?" So the three of them had plotted together. The evening arrived clear and perfect. Bennett suggested a walk around the property before dinner. Sailor, unsuspecting, agreed. They strolled through the gardens and toward the ancient live oak trees. At the edge of the property, their branches forming a natural cathedral. Spanish moss swayed gently in the breeze. The setting sun painted everything gold and amber. "This is beautiful," Sailor said, breathing in the autumn air. "I never get tired of this view." "Neither do I," Bennett replied, but he was looking at her. Then he heard rustling in the bushes, followed by poorly suppressed giggles. Eli and Jonah emerged, holding a hand-painted sign between them. "Say yes, Sailor." Sailor's hands flew to her mouth as Bennett lowered himself to one knee. "Sailor Thompson," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "A year ago, you broke the most important rule in my house. You taught my children to pray when I'd forbidden it. You gave them comfort when I was too broken to provide it. You challenged me, changed me, and helped me find my way back from a darkness I thought was permanent." He pulled the ring from his pocket. "You've become the heart of this family. The boys love you, I love you, and I'm asking, we're all asking, if you'll make this official. Will you marry me?" Sailor's tears fell freely as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, yes, of course yes." Bennett slipped the ring onto her finger and rose, pulling her into his arms. The twins crashed into them both, and the four of them stood beneath those ancient oaks, holding each other and laughing and crying all at once. A new chapter was beginning. The wedding took place 3 months later at New Hope Baptist Church, where Sailor had worshipped for years, and where Bennett had slowly rebuilt his relationship with faith. It was a small ceremony, close friends and family only. Bennett had learned that the size of a guest list meant nothing compared to the quality of the hearts present. Selah walked down the aisle in a simple ivory gown, escorted on one side by Eli and the other by Jonah. Both boys wore miniature versions of their father's suit and couldn't have looked more proud. Bennett stood at the altar watching them approach, wondering how his heart could feel so full when he'd thought it was permanently broken. But perhaps that was the point. Broken things, when properly healed, often became stronger than they were before. In the front pew, carefully placed, sat a framed photograph of Caroline with a single white rose beside it. Selah had insisted on it. "She's part of this family's story," Selah had said when Bennett protested. "She should be honored here." As the pastor led them through their vows, Bennett promised to love, honor, and cherish Selah for all his days. She promised the same, her voice steady and sure. Then, in a moment Bennett had planned but the pastor didn't expect, Bennett asked if he could say something. "I'd like to pray," Bennett said quietly. Selah's eyes widened with emotion. Taking her hands, Bennett closed his eyes and spoke from his heart. "Thank you, God, for second chances. For this woman who taught me that faith isn't about getting the answers we want, but trusting in your plan even when it's hard. Thank you for these boys, and for helping me become the father they deserve. And thank you for taking my broken pieces and creating something beautiful. Amen." When Bennett opened his eyes, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. The pastor pronounced them husband and wife, and when Bennett kissed his bride, the twins cheered louder than anyone. The Sinclair family was complete. This is the story of how a forbidden prayer became the catalyst for healing an entire family. It's proof that the very thing we push away in our pain might be exactly what we need for our healing. Bennett learned that grief doesn't have to turn into bitterness. That walls built to protect us often just imprison us. That letting people in, even when it's terrifying, is how we find our way back to life. Selah showed us that love means risking everything for what's right, even when the cost is high. And two little boys reminded us that children often understand what adults forget, that talking about the people we've lost keeps them alive in our hearts, and that families can be built from the broken pieces if we're brave enough to let them. Sometimes the rules we create to survive are the very things preventing us from truly living. It's never too late to open your heart again. Thank you for taking this journey with me today. If this story touched your heart, I need you to do something right now. Don't just feel it, act on it. First, drop a comment below and tell me which life lesson hit you hardest. Was it about grief? About second chances? About the courage to love again? I read every single comment, and your insights matter. Second, think of someone in your life who needs to hear this message. Someone who's built walls around their heart. Someone who's afraid to hope again. Someone who thinks their story is over. Share this video with them right now. You might be the answer to a prayer they haven't even spoken yet. Third, if you haven't subscribed to Mr. Roman's Story Vault, what are you waiting for? We're building a family here, a community of people who believe in the power of faith, hope, and love to transform even the darkest situations. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that might change your perspective on life. Every week, I bring you narratives that don't just entertain, they inspire, challenge, and remind you of what truly matters in this life. Until then, remember this: your story isn't over, your heart can heal. And sometimes the person you least expect becomes exactly who you need. This is Mr. Roman, reminding you that every ending is just a new beginning waiting to unfold. I'll see you in the next story.